Well, let's bring in three members of Parliament now to talk about the latest developments and the pipeline blockades and the government's strategy for trying to have them come down, try to deal with all of this. We know that ministers want to be granted a meeting with the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs who oppose the Coastal GasLink project on their territory. Some of them are headed for Ontario and Quebec, and as more layoffs hit the rail industry in this country, lots to discuss. Let's bring in those three members. Pam Damoff is the Liberal MP for Oakville North Burlington in Ontario and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Indigenous Services. Todd Doherty is the Conservative MP for Cariboo Prince George in Northern BC and his party's critic for transport. And Taylor Bachrach is the NDP MP for Skeena-Bulkley Valley, that's in BC as well in the north. And the Wet'suwet'en territory is in his riding, the territory we've all been talking about the last 2 weeks. Good to see you all. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.
Pam Damoff, let me start with you, and I'm trying to get a sense here of how this plan is coming together, because we have Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs heading for Ontario and Quebec to meet with some of their supporters, Mohawk supporters, over the next couple of days and the weekend here in this part of the country. And yet we have a letter out from Carolyn Bennett, the minister, saying that she is willing, along with her counterpart in British Columbia. Here's what the letter says. We both commit to be in Smithers as early as Thursday, February 20th, 2020. We'll be available to meet with any of the hereditary chiefs to discuss these matters of great concern to the Wet'suwet'en Nation. We understand some of the hereditary chiefs may not be available. We commit to coming back again when they are. We look forward to continuing the discussion in person to achieve our shared goal of safe resolution of the current impasse. And I'm reading all that because in this context of the chiefs seem to be coming this way, the ministers want to go that way, and this letter seems to speak about a fair bit of time that could elapse before the meetings take place or before we move ahead on a solution. What do we make of all of this?
Well, I think it shows that what's happening is changing by the hour. I think it's a good sign that the chiefs are coming east, and as long as dialogue is happening, that's always a really good thing.
Well, they're coming east, but not to meet the government. They're
no,
coming east
I
to
know,
meet their
but I
supporters.
mean, you know, you've got conversations that are still happening, and between the government and Indigenous peoples, and you know, quite frankly, this is a challenge for everyone in Canada right now. I'm not going to downplay what's happening in terms of layoffs and people who are being impacted by shortages. It's something that the government is seized with, and we're continuing the dialogue to try to come to a peaceful resolution for that. I think that's what everyone wants, is a peaceful resolution. We have differing opinions between some of the parties on the best way to move forward with this, but I think there's agreement that we want a peaceful resolution to what's happening.
Mr. Doherty, when you hear me read that part of the letter and what we know about the travel plans of the hereditary chiefs, what does that say to you?
Well, it just speaks to exactly what we've been saying, that there is no plan. This blockade and this crisis has been going on for 2 weeks now. The Prime Minister literally just got back into Canada earlier this week, and now all of a sudden you've got the two parties that should be talking crisscrossing the country and trying to play catch up here. And you know, I have the greatest respect for my colleagues on both sides here. You know, the comment about the dialogue between the First Nations and the government, well, clearly there isn't dialogue going between the First Nations and government. You know, we need the Wet'suwet'en, all of the Wet'suwet'en leaders, hereditary chiefs, the chiefs and elected councils in a room talking with government, talking together first and foremost as well too. This is a Wet'suwet'en issue.
But clearly the government's approach
Peter,
here, right?
But there has been no approach. And Peter, if you allow me this, today we heard CN announce 500 layoffs. Via Rail announced another further 1,000 layoffs. And the CEO, in making that announcement, said in the 42 years of Via's existence, they have never seen this type of major disruption.
Okay, what I was going to say
that is unprecedented. What we need to see is a plan, and what you're hearing very clearly that there isn't a plan.
Mr. Bachrach, what I was going to say is that based on my reading of this letter, what I've just read, it sounds like part of the plan, if I can frame it that way, is to clearly cede the timing of this process to the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs. And what do you think of this? This suggests we're ready to meet when you want us. And if there's going to be a delay, we'll meet when we can, whenever you tell us. That suggests that this is open-ended, that there's no deadline from when this might get resolved?
Well, Peter, we have to ask ourselves what's missing from this equation, and what's missing is personal leadership on the part of the Prime Minister.
Absolutely.
The Wet'suwet'en Chiefs asked for him to come and meet with them weeks and weeks ago. Where was he? He wasn't even in the country. This is a very serious issue. Canadians are beginning to grasp just the gravity of this issue with trains stopped across the country and with layoffs. We need the Prime Minister to show personal leadership, go to where the chiefs are, and sit down and start having those conversations.
Pam Demoff, we're hearing this suggestion a lot. Why doesn't the Prime Minister get on a plane and go to wherever the chiefs are and say, here I am, let's talk?
Well, I think that, this is a conversation that's had as part of a team, and cabinet team. We do have incredibly capable people as part of that team, and I would say Minister Miller and Minister Bennett are two of the best that you could put into this position. If you listen to them speak last night, I don't think any party would disagree with the way that they're moving forward with this. The Prime Minister is part of these conversations. Because he hasn't been the face of the meetings does not mean that he's not part of what is happening.
And I guess, but at what point does a Prime Minister or a national government say, okay, we've now made repeated outreach to try and set up some sort of meeting, and it's fair enough, you're going to meet the supporters at various blockades in Mohawk territories in Ontario and Quebec and speak to them, and we'll see what comes from that. Maybe that's going to be a way forward after those discussions in the next few days. But at what point do you say we've offered a number of meetings, you haven't taken us up on on a timetable that works for all of us, and so it's time to talk deadline. When do we get to that point?
I don't know. I think
14 days ago.
Well, this is a very complex problem, and offering simple solutions is not the way forward. We've seen what happens when people think they have a simple solution to the problem, and then you end up with something like what happened at Oka or at Ipperwash.
But how long does the government wait to get a meeting?
Well, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the dialogue is continuing. People are continuing to talk, and I think people need to recognize how complex this issue is, and just throwing out, just enforce the rule of law. Politicians don't enforce the rule of law. Police forces do that. So I think we need to be patient. But we recognize the problems that Canadians are having. It's very real for a lot of people. I just saw a tape earlier today of two Indigenous people having a conversation. One was a protester and one was an oil worker, having a conversation about the challenges in both of their lives, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's open, but that, okay, we'll leave that for what it is. It does spur that kind of conversation in these kinds of situations. Mr. Doherty, let me hear from you. And one of the things being talked about now is the longer this goes on, people will want to talk about compensation for these workers, and what should they be owed as this goes on?
Well, again, listen, my colleague from the NDP aptly said this: lack of leadership from Prime Minister Trudeau. We are now seeing losses in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and let's be very clear that just because the blockades are removed tomorrow, if that takes place, the recovery from this is going to be months and months and months. The damage has been done not only locally, nationally, but internationally. We have 19 ships off the port of Prince Rupert that are waiting for product, 85 ships off the port of Vancouver. We have goods and services that have not been able to make it to their final destination. We have producers that are feeling the pinch, and we have job losses that are going on. In terms of compensation, in terms of compensation, it is the abject failure of the Prime Minister as to why we are where we are today. And I do believe that the government is fully responsible for some form of compensation for those losses.
Okay, Mr. Bachrach, can I hear you on where the NDP is on the notion of how long would you suggest the government wait if they continue to not be able to get a meeting to at least begin this conversation with some of the hereditary chiefs before the government could be in a position to say, okay, look, we've tried, now we have to go to the next phase and these blockades have to come down?
Well, as I said before, what they haven't tried is making the Prime Minister demonstrate some personal leadership and meet with the chiefs directly. What we do know is that the use of police force risks making this situation even worse. We saw that in the wake of the arrests that happened just weeks ago. And at this point, what we need for the Prime Minister to recognize the severity of this situation, to get on an airplane and to sit down with the chiefs and talk about how we resolve this dispute as quickly as possible. And the country's counting on him to do that. I think it's long overdue.
And as this, just a final word from you on this idea of this notion of compensation for people who are now going to be facing layoff, small businesses, we're going to hear coming up, are facing some real tests. I have a guest that's going to tell us that some of his members are going to have trouble making payroll if this goes on much longer.
Sure, the economic costs of this are huge. The Port of Prince Rupert is in the riding I represent. The railroad goes right through it. But at this point, Peter, the focus has to be on resolving the dispute peacefully. This is a very divisive issue in our communities. We need to be using words that don't divide things further, that don't inflame the tensions that already exist. And we need cooler heads to prevail. We need the Prime Minister to be personally involved.
Okay, I thank you all for your time tonight, and we'll chat again. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter.
Thank you.